Scott Kummer, thanks for being here.
Brandon, thanks for having me. I was actually thinking about you. I did a podcast with someone the other day, and it was a person that I don't talk to often, but when I do, I feel like we're very good friends who just don't keep in touch. And it's like, I feel like I could just not see you for 15 years and then run into you and we would just pick up where we left off. You're like one of those people that I always think about, like I feel connected to, and I enjoy your company. So I'm glad I could come on here and talk to you. I'm just a little bit about me. I'm a lawyer, ultra runner, podcaster. I have two different podcasts, one about running and one about music, and I'm sure we'll get into both of those. Dog owner, husband, and a guy that lives on the south side of Chicago. So that's just a little bit about me. I do a lot of things, and I'm very busy, and I love them all. But I'm one of those people that like constantly has lots and lots of stuff going on, and it's either this or that or this or that. There's not a lot of downtime in my world. Too many side hustles, too much going on. But I'm hoping that that's going to change in the near future because I'm starting to age out of that lifestyle.
Mm. I I am pessimistic that it will change, but we'll see. We'll see what happens. Anything could happen. Who knows? So as you know, this show, My Favorite Things, is about some of your favorite works of art or creative works in life and that have meant something to you. So you sent me your list, and this one, the first one, is on cassette, I believe. Jimi Hendrix
Was.
plays Monterey live. Yes, probably not anymore. But Jimi Hendrix plays Monterey. Where are you at in life? How's this tape come into your hands, I guess?
Right.
What year is it?
So this would be maybe eighth grade, seventh, eighth grade. Um, I did a lot of thinking about this because music is such a big thing in my life. And this is not my favorite tape. This isn't the tape that I listen to the most, but when I think back to my life, I think about this tape, and this tape is a turning point where music becomes about me. It becomes something that I'm independently interested in, something that I'm choosing, and something that I want to know more about. And I got this cassette tape and we listened to it quite a bit because we thought Jimi Hendrix was cool and Purple Haze, and we all wanted to like smoke pot and be cool. And, like there's just something cool about Jimi Hendrix. But this album has a live version of Like a Rolling Stone. This is recorded live in 1967. It's a really great concert recording. He does a Star Spangled Banner. There's a whole bunch to it, but he plays Like a Rolling Stone, and that song captivated me. The lyrics, and he even says, if you ever listen to, there's like he gives a little phrase in the middle. He goes, "I know I missed a verse," and he kind of left something out of it. But I really wanted to know more about this song, which led me to Bob Dylan's version of Like a Rolling Stone, which then just, that was like the first time I was like, I listened to something, I want to know more about something, I'm investigating it, and I go out and I buy Bob Dylan, and then I fall in love with Bob Dylan, and then that becomes just a rabbit hole. My whole life has been Bob Dylan, has been the lyrics of Bob Dylan, going to see him. I met him once. It's a crazy story where I got to sit on the stage and meet him afterward. Um, I became, just enthused with music, learning more about music, collecting music. I was one of those kids that like constantly wanted to get as many albums and as many tapes as I could and learn about stuff. And then that leads me to, I read the liner notes to Bob Dylan, leads me to Jack Kerouac. Jack Kerouac leads me down a whole road of literature. Of course, I also learned about drug use. I remember a specific moment in high school where I was sitting at the desk with the On the Road on my table. And I think Andy Pearson talked about it On the Road in your show. And the teacher came by and he pointed to that book and he said, "Kid, don't let that shit fuck you up." And he was so right because, of course, I went and I tried drugs and I started drinking and this whole lifestyle of the guys from the Beat Generation. But all of that is like opened up. Like the key to all of that is, what's this Like a Rolling Stone song really about? And then it's like a springboard to literature, music, drug culture, the beginning of my spiral into alcoholism and drug addiction, like all of that from this one song. So that's kind of why it stood out to me.
What? So you're in eighth grade. Does somebody give you this tape? Do you buy it at a record store? How'd you get it?
I think I bought it because I don't know if. So you remember there was the movie Fast Times at Ridgemont High?
Mm-hmm.
There's a movie after that called The Wildlife, and it has Chris Penn instead of Sean Penn. But one of the characters is like he's dreaming about like Vietnam and stuff, and there's all this like Jimi Hendrix music in the background. And I think because of that, like kind of turned me on to Jimi Hendrix. I thought I should get some Jimi Hendrix because Hendrix is cool. And then I would have bought this tape with my own money from the record store back in the day.
It was your first Jimi Hendrix that you bought.
Oh, for sure. For sure. It was
Yeah.
one of the first tapes that I bought, period. But it was for sure the first time I'd heard Jimmy. And I think I bought it for Purple Haze. And I kind of screwed up because in theory I should have bought Are You Experienced? Because that would have been like the, essential Jimi Hendrix record to own. But for some reason, this was the one that was there. And that was the beginning.
Are you talking to your friends about this album when you listen to it? Are you talking to anybody about it, or what?
Oh,
What
we're
happens?
walking around with the boombox listening to this record together. Like my core group of friends in the eighth grade, they all would have known every word to every song on this record. We would have or this tape. We would have listened to it constantly. It was a really big deal to us.
Wow. Did anybody from that friend group have a similar path as you, similar experiences after that? Like when you think about what the tape did for you and like that story you just described and where you went with it, or was that
Yeah,
were
but
they?
but maybe not in a deeper intellectual way. I think a lot of them that was their avenue to drugs and alcohol or partying or liking guitar music, stuff like that. I don't think that they went all the way to like literature and
Mhm.
all of the other things that kind of spiraled out of this. But I think that there's people that just listen to music. I'm sure you meet them all the time. They're just like, oh yeah, that sounds good. That's all they know is it sounds good. And then there's people that like think about the lyrics and think about the music and think about the influences and how this came about, what this influenced, and that's the kind of person that I became, and that was in part because of this. I don't think that my friends were that way.
Yeah, I think about that as a when I've like created little pieces of art for the internet, and I think I realized that people don't necessarily need to follow you because you did one thing that's good, and I always compared it to music because I was like, yeah, some people just hear a song and they're like, yeah, it's a good song, and they don't. You and I or people like us would probably be say, okay, well, who is that? I want to find more of their music, and a lot of people don't. It's just kind of a thing.
Well, who is
Um,
that? I want to know more about him. I want all of the books. Then I want to, I want to meet him. I want to listen to podcasts about him. I want to know everything. And then when I feel exhausted, then I can move on to something else. But that's what happens when it's something cool like that. I'm all
yeah,
in.
yeah. Is this the first creative work where that happened to you? Is this
Yeah, for
like
sure.
and
Yeah.
then the pattern repeats throughout your life?
Yeah, I mean, there were other artists that I really liked. Like I loved Prince, like probably from like the sixth grade on, and I might have deep dived on him later in life, but I
Hmm.
think this was the first like path of inquiry that was started by something creative, something in the arts. I don't think I ever felt that way from a book or a song or like a
Hmm.
movie. It was this is like the first thing I can think of where I was just like, what's going on here? I need to understand this, and
Yeah,
it led to a lot.
yeah. Hey, Prince, just a fellow Midwesterner like me and you know, from Minneapolis. I don't think people ever think of Prince as a Midwesterner. I think they think of him as something
Oh,
else.
oh, for sure,
Yeah.
Midwest, 100%.
So, it's funny reading your list and like knowing how important music is to you. That's the only music we have on this whole list, which is kind of fascinating. Okay, so number two, Alcoholics Anonymous, the Big Book. What is the story behind this for you?
Well, obviously, with my Jimi Hendrix, my Bob Dylan, my Jack Kerouac, and my drugs, I was not headed down a very good path, and that path ended pretty quickly at the age of 21, where I kind of found myself thinking that this alcohol and drug usage might not be getting in the way of things, but it's certainly not helping, and maybe I should explore life without drugs and alcohol. And I learned a lot real fast. I learned that I was an alcoholic and a drug addict for sure. That it had arrested my development as an adult. That I didn't really understand how to live as an adult, how to make my own decisions. And I had gone to college and dropped out. I had been working in a bar. I'd been drinking on my job, after my job. Like the nights are getting longer, the days are getting shorter. And so I felt like maybe it was time for me to see if there was a change that I could make. And I initially did not, in connection with quitting drinking, I did not embrace AA or this book. I just tried not drinking. And I was able to do that. I don't want to say successfully because I was kind of a wreck, but I went a few years without drinking. And then I kept having problems in life or coming up against limitations or emotional, instability, stuff like that. I felt like I didn't, other people broke up with their girlfriend. I had like, I was like the say anything breakup scene, every single girl I ever dated, other people, like everything was just dramatic, over the top, and I didn't know how to deal with life really. And the people that I know that didn't drink or that were involved in recovery kept saying, well, that's because you're an alcoholic, like you need AA. And at the time, I thought AA was so that I wouldn't drink, and I was not drinking. So I didn't understand what the allure of that was. But then I came to learn that a lot of AA, now I've been sober for 32 years, a lot of that is learning how to live life on life's terms, learning how to, be a good human and take care of yourself and take care of other people and, be accountable and all of the tenets of that program. Whether, then I am not one of those people that says there's no other way to do it or that if you're not doing it that way, you're doing it wrong, because people can get real culty and preachy about that. But all of the things that I very reluctantly learned by reading that book or by going to AA meetings or getting a sponsor, doing those things, all of those things made my life better. There's not one thing that anyone ever took me aside and said, here's something that people in recovery do. And then when I finished it, I was like, well, that was a waste of time. I don't feel like that helped. And through that, I think I became the person that I am. Because part of my story is I had a really messed up childhood. I had sexual abuse as a child. Obviously I'm an alcoholic who quits drinking at the age of 21. Things weren't going well when you quit drinking that early, especially in the Midwest. I always joke like today, if I went to an AA meeting, there'd be like 17-year-old kids there. But in Milwaukee in 1992, AA is like, the average age was at that first AA meeting was like 150, and they talked about Jesus, and all those people had like, like lost a foot or a kidney or a family. I didn't fit in, but yeah, it's definitely where I learned how to be a grown up and how to have a moral code and the difference between right and wrong and building a community and learning how to live life and on life's terms and maybe just to accept life the way it is. And those are all things that have just kind of made me the person that I am. And there's a lot more to it than not drinking. And there's a lot of people out there that I've talked to that have said, I quit, but that's not for me. And I always say, but it's there if you ever want it, and it's something that's still a part of my life. And I go to those meetings. I go to those meetings for two reasons. I go to those meetings to tell people that that bad things have happened in my life and I'm still not drinking, or good things have happened in my life and I'm still not drinking. Because there's people in there that need to hear that stuff. People, you stop, but people still die, and you still get fired from your job, and you still get divorced. Like, bad stuff's gonna happen. And my problem is I never learned how to deal with that without getting high or getting drunk. And that's something that I learned in that program.
Yeah. So when you decided to quit, you just quit and that was it, and you've never.
I just quit. I went to one meeting and I thought, this is not for me. And then I spent about 5 years not drinking, working in bars, being a little
Oh wow,
miserable.
yeah.
And then every once in a while, when the pain got bad enough, I would go to a meeting, and it was funny. I would go, I didn't know about the steps or the book or anything. I didn't know anything. I would just go there, and when I got to talk, I would just cry and tell them all my problems, and then leave. And I never listened to anybody. But that was like that was my system. Just go there and like vomit all my emotions and leave. And once I finally had been around and someone taught me about everything, it kind of changed my perspective. But yeah, then eventually, I think it was when I was in law school. So getting sober puts me on the path to get my life back together and getting back into college. I dropped out of college because I was drinking. Went back to college, graduated college, got accepted to law school, came to Chicago from Milwaukee to go to law school. And then that's kind of when everything just kind of fell apart for me because it was just so much pressure. Like
Hmm.
now I'm dealing with really grown up stuff. I'm living all alone. There's nobody that knows that I don't drink. I'm going to law school, which is kind of a nightmare all by itself. And so that's when I said, you know what? I got to find somebody to help me. And I went, found a sponsor, started going to meetings. I said, I'll do whatever you tell me to do. And that's when I kind of fully embraced the program of recovery.
So would you say the book was important, or is the book more like a symbol of all the work you did and all of just like AA itself and what it did for you?
I think the book's really important. I think
Okay.
it's a really well written book. It's a book that the people that wrote this tried to make an organization that no one could screw up. Try not to bring into controversy. They have a lot of
Hmm.
traditions and a lot of rules that are really good for there's a reason they've been around as long as they've been around. And a lot of the things that I didn't know how to do, like for example, one of the things people do is pray. I'm not really a God guy and I'm not really a praying guy. And I thought the whole thing was really hokey. But there's a part in this book where it says, here's how you pray. And I would just get down on my hands and knees every morning and read that part. And I don't know if it worked or not. It was more of just like, this is what we do. But I learned prayer from this book. I learned how to, make amends to people. I learned how to, do the right thing in the face of, problems and adversity. Like a lot of those lessons are in that book, and a lot of the rules for living, or let's just say guides for living, because they're mostly suggestions. But a lot of that is in that book, and I've studied it. I studied it with someone that had been around. We went chapter by chapter. I go to meetings where we read a chapter every week and talk about the chapter. It's it's kind of like the Bible, but it's not super religious. It's just more. Here's the story of a whole bunch of people who got drunk and how they figured out how to get their shit together, and maybe you can get your shit together too. So I don't want anyone to think that I'm preachy about this or that this is my religion, because sometimes I go 6, 8 months without going to one of those meetings, and sometimes I've gone years without picking up that book. But it's like a resource that I know is there, and I know that's 100% going to help every time I do something with it.
Yeah. Yeah, I like listening to you talk about it. I have, of course, my own journey, sobriety, and stuff like that. And I was like, yeah, I don't know if that was what caused me to become an accountable person, but it was definitely when I became accountable. So there must be something there. But yeah, there's a lot in there that's good. And I know it's a thing that a lot of people embrace and a lot of people don't embrace. And I'm like, you know what, man, whatever works. Let's just do that. Yeah.
If it works and if you're happy and if you're not, you know, a piece of garbage to the people around you, I don't care how you do it. It doesn't matter
Right.
to me.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Um. When's the last time you picked the book up and flipped through it?
Well, other than today, maybe about 2 or 3 months ago, when I was talking to somebody about prayer. They're like, how did you deal with the prayer thing? Because I was a philosophy student. I thought I was intellectual, and now they're telling me to do this spiritual stuff, and like, how do I do this spiritual stuff? And I told them basically that story that I got up every morning and read that part of that book, and it part of it was, when you get into the program, you get a sponsor. The sponsor is just someone that helps you, like they're your guide. And my
Mm-hmm.
sponsor had this really deep voice. He was this kind of like, he was an interesting dude. Let's just say that. And when I would call him for advice, he would always ask me if I had made the bed first, because that's part of like a orderly life is making your bed. And I would be like, no, I didn't make the bed because I wasn't a bed maker. And I think bed making's dumb. You get back in it again. Like what's the point of making the bed? He said, go make the bed and call me if things don't get better. Then he would ask me if I prayed, and I didn't pray. And he taught me this prayer from this book and said, go pray. And if it doesn't get better, then you can call me. And then he would ask me if I went to an AA meeting, and I would have to go to an AA meeting and then call him if things didn't get better. Well, it didn't take long before I realized that if you get up every morning and make the bed, pray, and go to an AA meeting, you don't have days where you have to call somebody for advice to get you off the ceiling. Like it's a great way to start your day. And yeah, so that's kind of like part of that story of how I embraced all of those concepts.
Yeah. That's funny. I had a guy in my rehab group who said the bed making thing. And I don't know if I had even encountered it in the book at all, but I was like, yeah, I'm gonna do that too. and then through my, the rest of my life, I lived in very small places where if you make the bed, you got a good shelf to put stuff on during the day. So.
Well, it's that idea that you can't think your way into acting right, but you can act your way into thinking right. So
yeah.
You take action and then you start to think the right way.
Yeah. Right. That's a good point. Yeah. Hanif Abdurraqib, who's one of my favorite writers. I don't know if you've ever read any of his stuff. Mm-hmm. You would probably love his basketball book about following LeBron James in Ohio when he was growing up. But there's a scene where he's like laying on his back. He's in jail for a little bit for some reason that he never says why, but he's got like a balled up sock, 2 socks, and he's just like making the shooting motion in his little cot in this jail, which is I think like sort of a gymnasium at that point. But he has a line in there, which I will not be able to say it as beautifully as he does, but he's like, with enough repetition, anything becomes a religion, and it's sort of like, wow. It's the depth of it is incredible the way he says it, but it's like your routine in those days reminded me of that.
Well, it's like fake it till you make it.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. So book number 2. This is William Storrer, the Frank Lloyd Wright catalog.
Yep.
Where are we at this? Oh, there we go. How old are you when this comes in?
It's ironic because I went to Frank Lloyd Wright High School, and I don't recall even knowing who Frank Lloyd Wright was while I was in high school. But at some point in life, I started to really appreciate architecture. I started to like it. I didn't understand it. I didn't take drafting. I didn't take art. I have no artistic ability, nothing in this area in terms of skill sets. But I would see buildings and I would think that they were magnificent. And that, to me, it's like an art form that people live in or work in. So it's like another whole level. It's not just that's a pretty thing to look at in the wall. It's there's a bathroom in this work of art. And I started to notice that a lot of the things that I liked were modern architecture, and then specifically Frank Lloyd Wright. And then obviously it kind of triggers that he's from Wisconsin. I went to Frank Lloyd Wright Middle School, whatever. So I decided I would go look at some of these Frank Lloyd Wright books. I want to say part of this may have also been cultivated by that Ayn Rand book, The Fountainhead, because she interacts with an architect in there. And that's a book about an architect. That might have had some say in all this because that was it. In this period of life, I was reading some of that in between being not in college and getting back to college. That was some literature that I read. But I decided to start going and looking at these houses. And what this book is just a list of the houses and what city they're in. Now, this is 1995. There's no internet. There's no MapQuest. There's no way of knowing where this stuff is. I was literally getting like the map, trying to find the road, and then going to the road and driving up, and it turned into like a treasure hunt. But I managed to see about 250 of the 400 houses. Did a lot of traveling. Like I would go to California. I would look at everything in LA. I'd go to San Francisco, and I spent years, probably from about 92 till maybe when I met my wife. I was still doing it because on our first date, we went and looked at Frank Lloyd Wright houses. This was like a thing that if I'm coming to visit you and there's a house nearby, we're gonna go there. And a lot of times you just go there and then you see it from the street. That's the end of the story. Like there's not much more to it. Other times you go inside, or it'd be like a church or some sort of a public building. They give tours. I would go see that. But I have just a completely unreasonable and um, unlikely love of modern architecture. And it's also funny because when I went to college, I was going to do a podcast about this, and I may still do it someday. When I went to law school, I wrote a letter because the Frank Lloyd Wright College of Architecture isn't like a normal college. It's like a fellowship where you go and you live there and you farm, and it's like you don't have to have any credentials. They just take people based on their story, and you don't have to have any expertise. It's a very weird school, or at least it was then. It's just an eclectic group of people that want to do this. I actually wrote a letter to them, which I never sent. And the letter basically is just like, I don't want to be a lawyer, like 50 years old someday, wondering if I should have been an architect. I never sent that letter. I still have it. And I never really explored architecture, but I kept this love of architecture. So I thought it would be kind of a fun podcast to go through these houses one by one and just talk about them, and like to go to them maybe and talk about what I learned about them and what's near them. It's just I don't have time for another project right now. I've like started to think and develop it, but and it's another one of those things where like, okay, so there's like 500 houses or buildings in this book, and if I went and did that, there's like maybe 500 people in the world that would think that is I cannot believe someone did this. Someone needed to do this. This is the greatest thing ever. But then that's it. Nobody else.
I push back on that, dude. That's like a classic. It's like a classic model for somebody writing a book. I read a book by this guy. I think it's actually just called Dishwasher, and he wanted to wash dishes in all 50 states, like in restaurants and stuff. And honestly, like one of my favorite adventure books of all time. And this guy's like sort of a flake, and of course he only gets like 30 of them done, and that's the end of the book. But like he washes dishes on like an offshore oil rig, and oh my gosh, the like a scenic train, ski resort, a fish cannery in Alaska, and it's incredible.
Yeah.
But people do that. There's one called Catch, where a guy just like tries to play catch with people across. He ends up playing catch with like, I want to say like Bill Clinton or something. Anyway, it's a pretty classic narrative like idea, like discovering something through a list. I'm for
I
it.
can also talk about
quit your job. You got to quit your job as a lawyer so you don't become a lawyer who wishes he would have.
Well, I also thought about like you could talk about like how to get there and what's near there and what to do near there, and then maybe if you get like halfway through the series, then the people might start inviting you into the house, or maybe PBS picks up the podcast and says, there's not a lot of people listening to it, but this is the arts, So it could still happen. It really could. I would love to do it. This also leads me to other architects and other architecture, and like me and my wife, we're going to France. She thinks I should write a book about this Le Corbusier, this other architect I like. We go there, we look at everything that he ever built, and we're working our way around France to look at all of his buildings. We went to the his boyhood home and stuff like that. And he's another modern architect, contemporary of Frank Lloyd Wright, and another kind of goofball. Like all these people like Dylan or Frank Lloyd Wright or Le Corbusier, they peak when they're in their 20s, and then they live to their like 90, and their whole life they're thought of as like the greatest living whatever. It's just you can't help but be a little messed up under those circumstances,
For sure.
So I like the legend and the story behind a lot of these people too, because they're Frank Lloyd Wright and Le Corbusier are both extremely just colorful characters who led crazy lives. You could write a book about each part of their life, and probably it'd be like 5 volumes.
Yeah, I don't think we examine that story enough, where we like, athletes included, professional athletes, professional musicians, like your career starts when you're like 19, 20, and then you're told you're the greatest for, however many years. And professional athletes, I think specifically men, only interact with men most of the time. They're extremely rich. they have no idea how to buy an avocado, at a supermarket. And we expect these people to be normal. It's like, that's not a good
I mean,
pathway.
and some of them are, which is even crazier.
Yes, yeah. That's an anomaly, I think.
Well, like you mentioned, LeBron. LeBron's been one of the most famous people in the world since he was 17.
And there's been no scandal. It's him. It's like him and Tom Hanks. That's all we got.
Ralph Nader.
So, Ralph. Well, yeah, Ralph Nader. Okay.
I mean, like Chevy, they investigated him to try to find dirt on him, and they couldn't find anything on him. I mean,
yeah.
But yeah, I think about that, and then it's kind of like side note about LeBron. So we go to all the Bucks games, and one game we got to hand out the game ball at center court we went to the captain's meeting and gave out the game ball. And when you do this, they take you down on the court and you stand next to the bench while the players warm up, but they tell you don't talk to anybody, don't yell, don't move, just stand there. That's all you can do. And so we watched because we wanted to see what it was like when other people did. We were very conscious of this. And it's very surprising that no one talked to these people. You know that they're there for that reason if you're a player or if you're on the court. And you know that you could just make their day if you would just walk. Like if Giannis would have walked up and hugged me, my whole life would have been better forever, But no one ever does that except one person, one time. LeBron James. He walked up to the family and he gave them both a hug and said hi to them and they went and warmed up. And I just thought that's the kind of person that LeBron is. People rag on him all the time. People can say whatever they want about him, but that's really nice. It's like he realizes everywhere he goes, he's living in somebody else's dream, and it seems like he never forgets that.
Boy, that's a great way to put it, man. That's amazing. Yeah. Well, anyway, I think you should write the book. Honestly, if you want to do a podcast, I'm going to tell you that transcribing a podcast can equal a book too. I mean, it can work, or it can be a very good first draft or a decent first draft.
Yeah. Well, the other part of it is that there's stories about these houses. That they're not just the nuts and bolts of the house, but it's like who was the person that was commissioned for? What was their story? What do we know about that relationship between them and the architect? Sometimes there are goofy stories of Wright going there, interacting with the client and having conflict with the client, stuff like that. So there may be stories within the story, and then some of them might just be, it's his house, nobody knows anything, burnt down 10 years later, and that's the end of the story.
This episode is 45 seconds long.
Well, some of them might be 10 episodes long.
Right.
There's some iconic buildings that have huge histories behind them.
I wonder if somebody's done this exact same thing for train cars.
I looked all over the podcast app for something architecture or Frank Lloyd Wright related.
No, for trains. I feel like train guy is like a thing. Like people who are obsessed with trains, and I bet
I know a train guy.
Yeah, right.
This guy Gio Di Demonica, he is a huge train fanatic. He's probably listening right now, going, "I know all about trains."
I feel like if you ride on an Amtrak train across the country, you'll encounter a train guy. But I bet there's a train guy who's done a podcast or a book about train cars. That's a model for your Frank Lloyd Wright book. But who knows? Anyway, let's move on to your fourth. Also a book, Kindle Mini, which I have read too. The Long Run by Mishka Shubalay. Is that how you say his last name? Shubalay. Mishka Shubalay. Yes, because you've met this guy, right?
I'm friends with him.
Yeah.
But it wasn't when I read it.
No. So
yeah. You read it too?
Yeah. For some reason it was like highly advertised for a while somehow, or it popped up. It was the
best-selling Kindle Mini at the time of all time. It was number one.
It's a short book. So
yeah,
what year?
Maybe like 50 pages.
Yeah.
So this would have been maybe 2011, 2010, right around there. I got into running by a friend of mine in a law firm that was an elite marathoner. And through a course of crazy events, I was supposed to run a half marathon with my law firm, but my boss paid me to not run. And it kind of stuck with me that I didn't do this thing, which kind of led me to want to do it even more. So I started training and ran my first marathon in 2000. Yeah, 2000. And then I became like I want to run a sub 4 hour marathon guy, and I did multiple marathons in a year. Went to the Fleet Feet, ran with those people. Running became this huge part of my life, and running friends and all that kind of stuff. And I never got good at it, like ever. I kept trying to like break 4 hours in the marathon, and I would never come close. And I kept staying about the same, meeting friends, but I was always in the back of the pack, and it wasn't a really fun existence. And by about 2008, maybe like 15, 16 marathons into all this, I met my wife. And you know how it is when you first get married, it's really easy to say, well, I don't need to do any of that stuff now. So running kind of took a back seat. And I had always had in the back of my mind, someday I want to get back into running. Someday I want to run again. And I have no idea how I came across this book. Absolutely none. But I did, and I started to read it. And it's basically a book by a guy who was in a punk band and decided to get off drugs and alcohol. And he kind of does it through running. And he tells the story of his first 50 miler. And while I'm reading this Kindle Mini, I'm thinking, maybe I could run 50 miles. Maybe that's the answer. Maybe I can't run faster, but I can run further, and maybe get in shape, maybe lose a few pounds. I don't know. So I get this idea in my head that I'm gonna run 50 miles. And you know, as you do, all the things we're talking about, I can download all the podcasts and get the books and the magazines and join the local ultra running group. And I want to know everything about ultra running. I went to the Fleet Feet had Christopher McDougall and Scott Jurek leading a run. This was right after Eat and Run had come out. So I got to meet both of them and get their books. And then I read Born to Run and I read Eat and Run. And next thing you know, I'm all in on this ultra running thing. And it's really funny. And Mishka Shubalay is like a channel marker of my life. And I talk about this. Did you ever give a speech to the college class for Emily Wainless? Do you know who that is? All right. So there's this woman, she's out by you, and she teaches a course on ultra running. And I give a lecture to the students every year. She usually has notorious runners. Like she'll have, famous good runners and like famous people in the sport. And then I'm always the last one. And I don't know why she has me on. But the lecture I give them has grown over time to, you can change the world unintentionally. And I changed the world through ultra running unintentionally. And I tell the story, and throughout the story, I'll mention people like the guy from the law firm that I was going to run the half marathon with that I didn't. She's like, remember him, because he's going to come up later. Mishka Shubalay is one of those people. I'm like, remember this guy, because Mishka wrote this book to just tell the story of, running 50 miles. I read this book, and as a result of reading this book, I get into ultra running. And when I get into ultra running, I form the Flatlander Ultra Runners in Chicagoland Ultra Running Group, which now is like 2,500 members in Chicago, has been around for 10 years. I formed the Ultra Runners in Recovery Group, where all the people that are recovering from drugs and alcohol who are in the sport kind of get together a little bit. Somebody tells me to start a podcast, a race company, just all of the things that have happened, and I'm one of those people that every day, not every day, very often someone says to me, you changed my life, or I'm different because of something that you did. Not me specifically, but my interview with so-and-so caused them to finally leave their husband or finally quit drinking or take their running seriously. Whatever the thing is that impacted them, all of this impact. And I always say, Mishka Shubalay has no idea what the trickle-down effect of his impact was. Some, slow, retired marathon runner in Chicago reads his stupid book and then changes thousands of people's lives as a result of it. And you as a creative person probably think about it sometimes, but not enough, that everything that we do has that chance. It has that opportunity, and in my case, and probably in Mishka's case as well, it's completely accidental. I didn't like finish reading his book and say, That's it. I'm going to change the world. I'm going to become a race director. I'm going to any of those things. All of it's accidental. All of it just kind of falls in my lap. But that's the proximate cause. And when people say that to me, they'll be like, you know what? You changed my life. I'm like, Mishka Shubalay changed your life. But for that guy, none of this happens. And it kind of blows him away because he never went on to run beyond the 50, and then he sees me run like 100 miles and, go do all this other crazy running stuff. And he's just like, I couldn't have inspired you because you did more than I ever did. I'm just like, you just never know what the effect of what you do is going to have removed several people from what you did. And that's kind of the brilliance of that. The long run book is just, I don't read that book. I don't run 50 miles. Flatlanders doesn't exist. Ultra Runners in Recovery doesn't exist. 10 Junk Miles doesn't exist. I don't know you. I'm not on this podcast.
Yeah.
Like, none of those things. And in all of those people that I've met that have said, as a result of X, and X represents something that I've ever done in my life, they're better. That all traces back to that too.
Yeah. I kind of think, isn't that the entire point of art though, right? It's like share a story or a thing, a thought, an idea, and then people can do with it what they want, like it will affect them.
Maybe, but not today. Like today, art is, I'm going to become famous by doing this art. I'm going to influence people by doing this thing. People are intentionally trying to change I'm going to be a change agent by doing this stuff. I'm talking just accidental, Like I didn't set out to do any of this stuff.
I'd say some people are like that, but like, let's just, for a thought experiment, let's just say your races and your podcast are art, which they are. They are creative works. Creating and directing a race where people run around in circles or run around in the woods for 12 or 24 hours because you said it would be fun. That is a work of art. So in that way, you gave these people this platform to change their own lives. You gave them a reason to do it. So that wasn't like you being like, I'm going to influence people. You're like, hey, this would be fun. I'm going to create community here. I'll see what happens,
Creating community.
Yeah.
Which I think is not always the intention behind making art.
No. Well, there are many different reasons for making art, but I think the story you told is like, that's the best case scenario, the trickle down, right? And
but I think that you're going to have that regardless of your intention.
For sure.
It's just more mind boggling when it's not your intention. Like if you and I write a book about how to give up drugs and alcohol and get your life together, we're not going to be startled when the people that are waiting in line to have us sign their book say, hey, I got my life together, But, when so-and-so built this building, or when Jimi Hendrix, sang like a Rolling Stone at Monterey, wasn't thinking, some kid in the 8th grade is going to go on a whole journey because of this. I mean, he was just, like, it'd be cool to cover Bob Dylan's song,
Right. Or, you like later career Jack Kerouac at a book signing. You're like, hey, Jack Kerouac, you destroyed my life. I did drugs because of you. Like, that's unintentional as well. But yeah, I guess I think more in the positive sense of it. But yeah, it's really cool. And I always like, people say this book changed my life, and I'm like, well, most books change your life. It's just like a little, you're not doing a 90-degree turn. Like, most books change your life like just a little angle, and you're like, your path.
But what if it's the guy that says he decided he was going to go eat a double cheeseburger at every Wendy's in America because he read your life? Now, your book, that's a huge shift.
Big turn. Big turn.
You messed that guy up.
Yeah.
You're his Jack Kerouac.
Well, I mean, that could be I actually have a book by somebody who went to try to eat the best hot dogs in America. It's actually pretty good book. But yeah, I don't know. If it's positive, that's a wonderful thing. So yeah, Mishka, this is all your fault. Love,
yeah,
Scott.
It's all Mishka's fault.
Right.
100%.
Yeah. Good book. 50 pages, right? And that's
something
so small.
That. It's not very long.
Yeah, it is. I remember reading it and thinking, how do you get these made? And why is this one so successful? And yeah, it's good. In the canon of running literature, as said. Did you think like your? I feel like several of these stories have been, I am an alcoholic, but for something else. You know what I mean? You're like, and I feel like I see this in myself too. I wonder if you would go along with the school of thought where you're like, you go all in, you go very, very deep and very, very hard on things, the same way you interacted with substances, except it's more positive and productive for the rest
I
of your
think if
life.
there was like a semi-rad like pie chart of things in my life, there'd be things I things I don't like. That'd be a big chunk. Things I like way too much. Things I can't do anymore because I like them way too much. And then the smallest pie piece would be things I like, but I can take them or leave them. There's not a lot of that.
Yeah,
I think
right.
I think most things I just, like I I listened to the album, the 1,001 albums to listen to before you die. I did an album a day. Talk about ultra, right? One album a
Wow.
day, 1,001 albums. It took me, and it's more than 1,001. It ended up being like 1,189. So this is like a 4 or 5 year project
Yeah.
of listening to records. And then when it was over, I got the book 501 Essential 80s Albums, and I started a new one. I'm on like number 30 on that, you know? But that's just kind of like how I'm wired. It's like I want to do it. I like having
Yeah.
these projects.
Yeah. 500 Frank Lloyd Wright structures to see before you die.
Yeah.
That's your book title. Okay. Should we do your last one?
Yeah.
Which is a podcast, I believe more recent. Allison Rosen is your new best friend. Why is this your fifth one?
So when after I read the long run and I started the Flatlanders and the Ultra Runners in Recovery, and I got really into ultra running, I started listening to podcasts. And I was not an Adam Carolla fan. I listened to his podcast a handful of times. I kind of got tired of it quick because he's got like 10 bits and he just kind of recycles them. But he had this girl named Allison Rosen that was his news lady. And she would have like a segment where she read the news. And she started her own podcast called Allison Rosen is Your New Best Friend, which was, there's like A-list, B-list, C-list celebrities. These are like P-list celebrities who got together once a week and they sat around a table and talked about their lives. They had little inside jokes, little segments, but it was kind of a show about nothing by people who were not famous. Uh, and I got hooked into this show, and then my wife got hooked into this show. And I remember we were driving in the car one day, and she just said, why the hell do we care about these people? And why do we listen to this show? But we did, like Jenna's having a baby, and, oh my God, they're going to do the fruit song now. And, like, there was just something about the banter of good friends that was comforting and that made me feel good. Well, that idea festered in my mind. And one day when I was running on the trail with this guy, Corey Faye, and it was a local guy, I said, I thought maybe, one of the things I love about running long, okay? Let's say you come here and I say, hey, here's what we're going to do. We're going to run the I&M Canal for 50 miles together. It's going to take all day. We're going to stop at gas stations and fast food restaurants. Let's just do it. On that run, which probably sucks, we have a lot of conversations. And the conversations are probably the fun part of it. At some point we're doubled over laughing. At some point we're arguing. But that journey and those conversations, that's the fun stuff to ultra running to me. That's the glue that binds us. And that's sometimes what makes doing these runs fun. There are people out there in the middle of Montana or Idaho or whatever. They don't have ultra running friends. They don't have anybody to train with. They just run. And that's it. And I have this network of people that, we get together on a Sunday. Who wants to run 30 miles? I get like 20 people that show up and we all go run all day together and we have a great time. What if I took that friendship aspect and put it into a podcast form so that you would have running friends when you don't have anyone to run with? So that was my idea. Running friends when you don't have anyone to run with. And the guy looked at me and he's like, I think that might be a good idea. Now, understand if you listen to running podcasts now, running podcasts in 2012, there was basically just like 3 or 4 of them, and they were all exactly the same. You just won the UTMB. How did you do it? How did you train? What nutrition did you use? What's next? That's it. There was no long form conversational podcasts or uh, group gang type discussion podcasts that were funny. It was all very just vanilla. And so we didn't know what the hell we were doing. We went in my basement. We had a guy who knew a little bit about tech record it. And we just basically did 10-minute segments and we called it 10 junk miles and just made it up as we went. None of us had any experience. None of us knew anything about it. And we didn't know if anybody would listen to it or not. We didn't know if it was good or not. We knew we were having fun. That was it. But it ended up doing exactly what I wanted it to do, in that I started to get emails from people that said, thank you. You are now my running friends. You're the only people I've ever run with. You've made doing a 50 miler or a 100 miler seem more accessible to me. And understand, we're not in this podcast, this gang show format. We're not giving you tips on how to run. We're debating like which nut should get kicked out of the deluxe nut mix and which nut should be doubled. We're talking about children's cereal. We're talking about just, people's vasectomies. I mean, just crazy rant, the same crap that you talk about while you're running on the trail, right? Just whatever comes up, we talk about. Not scripted, not planned, no production. I didn't edit anything. I just zip, put it on the internet. And then just all of a sudden, thousands and thousands of people started listening to this podcast. And I mean, I didn't intend for that to happen. I didn't even know if anyone was going to listen. But as time goes by, then I started to add the long form one-on-one interviews that I do. And it's kind of like what we talked about a little bit earlier, like with the athletes. Like we know about LeBron, we know about his sports, we know about all that kind of stuff. But like, what does he do when he's not playing basketball? Like what is there about LeBron that like we would all be very surprised to know? Does he have a sailboat collection made out of popsicle sticks? Is he obsessed with, coming up with new ways to braid his daughter's hair? Like there's things about these people that are ultra runners that no one ever bothers to ask them about. Cause it's just like, what kind of gels do you use? What kind of shoes do you use? What are you running next? So I would interview famous or elite people, but more about who you are and what was your journey to getting there. And it would be the average podcast was probably like 45 minutes to an hour then. I would put out these podcasts that are like 2.5 hours, 3 hours, 5 hours long, talking to one person, and people enjoyed it. So those two things kind of went together. And now this is our 12th year, 6 million downloads later, all these people that come to me and said to me, this matters to me. I remember the moment that we figured out that it matters. It was like the end of a show, and we read a review by someone, and the guy said that he didn't know how he found the show, but that he weighed like 500, 600 pounds or something, and he started walking, and he Googled and he found our show and he started listening, and he said, and now I weigh like 250, and I'm going to do my first 50K this weekend, and it's all, and we all started crying. We're just like, we didn't even think for 1 second that what we were doing could possibly have that effect. But it's kind of like you and I talked about it a little bit when I interviewed you on the show. It's like your toaster oven thing. Like you never know what one thing is going to hit somebody, either good or bad. But every time I do a long form interview, there's someone that sends an email that says, Scotty, that's the one. That's the one. I cried. I connected. I will never forget it. It changed my life. Every single time I do one of those, I get that kind of feedback, from at least one person. And and again, now this is something that I didn't set out to do, something that I never wanted to be. I didn't want to be famous, didn't want to make money, didn't want, like it was just, let's just do this silly thing. And now all of a sudden, all these people listen to it. And then the next thing that causes is that I found this trail that I liked, and I was like, you know what, we should put a race on this trail. That'd be kind of fun. Nobody's ever put a race on this trail. So I put on a race. Here's what I didn't think about. All those people that didn't have any running friends, they're all coming to the race because I'm their running friend, right? And when they got there, they met each other. And then they created a community of people from listening to the podcast. They created their own Facebook page. During the pandemic, they had a book club, they had an album club, they did Zoom happy hours. It took on a life of its own, and not as a result of me. They connected with each other. And then I see people, it'd be like if you see, like, they're at the Berlin Marathon, and there's like 5 people with 10 junk mile shirts running together, and they met through the these are the people that didn't have anybody to run with, who met each other, and now they're out doing things and they're inspiring other people. There's podcasts that have kind of grown out of this, other podcasts and other communities and things like that. And it's like we talked about again. I know everybody that knows me is like, stop talking about this. It's the trickle down effect of impact that you never know. I think about it, and it created a shift in my life where I shifted from, okay, like, I had a good career. I still have a good career. My wife has a great career. In terms of like trying to, make it in life, I've made it in life. I'm good. Okay. Now I think, what is my metric? Okay. And my metric is, how can I impact the world around me? How can I change the world? And what am I doing? And how can I do it in a way that changes the world? And it's not the obvious one. Someone listening to us today and decides, I'm going to go change the world too. Okay. I'm not talking about that guy. That's a direct person. But I'm talking about, like, that story of that guy that weighed 500 pounds. I'm talking about his neighbor that's watching him out there running and saying, geez, if he can get his shit together, why can't I? Maybe I'll start running. And then he starts running, and his family loves him more. He gets healthier. He lives longer, and his kids get into sports. And then someone's inspired by them, and someone's inspired by them. And they have no idea what the hell 10 junk miles is. They've never met me. They don't know anything about me. But somehow or another, it ran downhill all the way to them. I think about it and it blows my mind. Like, to me, that's what life is about. That's what I want to do with my life. And so, Allison Rosen, I've never met. I've never talked to him. She has no idea. But again, she doesn't do her show. None of this stuff happens. None of those races happen. All the people that finish, like, I put on a race now. I put on 3 races. One of them's a 100-miler. I probably put 2,000 people on the trail a year on various races that I put on. And I'm there at the finish line hugging those people. And, maybe one on 3 people, they look at me like, who are you and why are you hugging me? Like, that's not what I was looking for at the end of this event. But then there are people that just collapse in my arms and say, you don't understand. I never would be here if it wasn't for you, And I just think, that's what I want to do with my life,
Yeah. And so many, like, the extrapolation you were saying is like, you're never going to know about 95% of those things, or 98% of them, Every once in a while somebody will reach out and send you an email or whatever, but, like, you don't know where all that stuff's going. So,
well, that's a takeaway. If you're listening to this right now and there's someone, and I'm not talking about me, and I'm not talking about Brandon, I'm talking about somebody in your life that makes a difference, that creates something, that makes a podcast, that painted a picture, that whatever it is that they do, a teacher that you had, whatever, go tell them you made a difference in my life, because I never get tired of that. And I think more people need to know that. And I think that the more we do that, people will take more chances to do things. They'll feel like what they're doing matters in the world. I don't need that to keep doing it, because I know what's happening. But I bet there are people that started a podcast. They only had like 30 people listen, and then they gave up. But one of those 30 people was all in on that, and it was gonna change their life, and they might have done all kinds of things as a result of it. So you never know who's listening. You never know what impact you can have. And that's kind of like, that's the theme when I was talking to those college kids. I always look at them in the beginning and I say, when I was in college, what did I need to hear? If I could go back to college and have someone tell me something, what would I want them to say? And it's, you can change the world. You can totally change the world. That's what I want. That's what I want to give to them.
I think that's a great place to end it, man. Or we go and look up Allison Rosen's email address and write her a thank you letter for this. Or thank you email.
Yeah,
Dude, this is fantastic. Thanks so much for doing it.
it's my pleasure. There's a lot of times when people didn't want to hear me talk, and it's nice to be able to.